line out there's overhead lines here, and there will be an overhead wire to two poles here, and then underground. It short runs the building, and then underground here. Those are all tied off of a single circuit here.
Which is
I think the
existing?
redundant power could be from generators.
No, there are two leads from Groton Utilities.
And then those are existing, is that correct? Those 35 kilovolt feeds from Groton Utilities are existing?
So we were supposed to have a meeting with Groton
Sorry, Paul Herron again. We were supposed to have a meeting with Groton Utilities last Tuesday. Unfortunately, there was an incident on 95 that took out some power lines, and Groton Utilities was a little preoccupied. So we have a new meeting scheduled for this Thursday. So I can't speak right now to exactly where, what the route of the lines would be, but we have spoken to Groton Utilities. We've spoken to them, for the past couple of years, and they've told us that they can provide the two sources of power. We just, I just don't know, the route that those would take.
So another topic for the continuation of the public hearing to make sure we understand that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you should probably note the 5 staff comments, or the 5 plus non-yield comments that came in Friday, April 5th, plus the alternatives analysis, the technical report, and one other report. Those are all part of the record.
Yes.
Just so you remember filings last week that came in, this is what they were part of the record, with plus responding to the DL staff questions.
Other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, I'd like to turn it over to John.
Good evening. For the record, I'm John Osaski. I'm a senior project manager with Jacobs Engineering Group. I'm also a licensed PE in the state of Connecticut. I am the project manager for the multidisciplinary design team overseeing this project. I wanted to go over a couple of key engineering elements. Some of this is a little redundant, but I'm going to come at it from a different angle and try to address some of the previous questions. So, in this graphic, I wanted to kind of summarize some of the variances that were already discussed. The concept of the lowest floor elevation being at 12.5. The words are a little small here, but the base flood elevation is actually 14. So we're 1.5 feet below the base flood elevation. Under normal circumstances, the permitting process would require the floor elevation to be 1 foot above. So that's where the 2.5 foot discussion sometimes comes from. The concept of flood resistant construction comes in looking at not only the finished floor of the building, but all the ancillary equipment within the building. So just talking about the building structure itself, we've got about a 3-foot concrete slab on 4-foot diameter steel and concrete piles. There's about 500 piles underneath that building. That is founded into the rock below it. So the building is anchored in place, and then on the outside of the building, there's a 2.5 foot wall all the way around, concrete wall. That provides us some flood resistant for impact resistance if there is any wave action. The concept of the VE, which stands for the velocity zone, is it's 3 foot above the normal base flood elevation, and that accounts for a wave sitting on top of the flood elevation. So that's the concept of getting to that elevation 14. And then since we're a functionally dependent use, we needed to be at the elevation, as Paul said, for the floating assets and the other operational considerations we have. What I wanted to highlight here is what you see there, the mean high water level being 0.9 feet and the mean low water elevation being minus 0.7 feet. The normal water level won't be anywhere near our deck. And interestingly enough, I believe it's a 1938 hurricane The highest elevation, I think I remember offhand, 8.75 feet. So even during the highest water elevation during a hurricane event, it get nowhere close to the elevation of the structure we're building. And then with the construction of the equipment inside, we still went ahead and elevated all electrical equipment, all fans, all switchgear, anything that's within the main building above elevation or at elevation 15 or above. So it is compliant with the flood management regulations from that standpoint. In many cases, we took some of the critical electrical equipment and put it 13 feet in the air on stands, partially to give us access, but also to give us a little more buffer for protection of our critical electrical equipment. So let's see. Get the right one here. So I wanted to take a minute here and talk a little bit about the renderings. Oh, I'm sorry. One last thing about the flood resistance I just wanted to highlight. We've given you overviews of all this, but there's architects and structural engineers that are working right now as we develop the design. And when the full permit application comes into the building official, all those documents will be assigned and sealed by a professional engineer, which is a requirement of the flood ordinance in your regulation. So moving on into some of the architectural features. As you can see, there's a look from the operating deck down in the yard, looking west. As we mentioned earlier, that's the utility building that houses the air compressors, the electrical switchgear. That is also elevated above that base flood elevation. And that feeds all those critical services into the main part of the building where the trades are actually working on the boats. I'm trying to make sure I don't miss a point here. So the lower part of the structure you can see in the dark gray, we've designed that to basically ground the structure and give you a lower point of focus when you're looking at the structure. The lighter gray areas softens the appearance and the presence as you're panning the horizon. We did go through a lot of color alternatives with our architect team, and all the other types of facade features and color palettes that we put on there did nothing but draw your attention to the building when you glance at the horizon. And so we didn't see that as a benefit to the concept of trying to soften the presence of that building on the horizon. The building paint system is a high-end marine grade utility paint, an industrial paint, but it's more of a matte type finish paint, so it doesn't have any reflective capability, so you're not going to get a glare off of it either from any type of lights that you might see in vehicle lights that are driving past the structure at night, or any other type of light glaring off the structure. So as Paul had mentioned before, well, let me get to the next one here. Here's another view looking from the Thames River, the Long Island Sound, looking north along the structure. There again, you see the dark gray on the bottom with some of the vehicular and man doors there, and the mega doors on the end. You can see the semblance of the piles on the bottom. And then you see the basic shipyard just north of us here, the industrial shipyard. That's the existing facility at EB. There is a little bit of mechanical equipment that is needed to bring seawater in while the submarines are being tested out on this deck, but it's shielded from view from Eastern Point Road. And lastly, again, this is another picture you've seen before. The concept here again was we as the engineers, and I just wanted to restate this, we were given the criteria of a sub that's that big. And we were told we need to do these things to that sub. You need to give us a building that we can do that. You need to make it as small and as compact as you can. And so we've spent the last 9 months working with EB, and they've spent many, many years working with their internal design staff to really minimize that clearance. They know a lot about how they build boats in the north plant, in the north yard at Building 260. So they're bringing that in to optimize how they do it, how they move materials, how they move people. As we stated before, they've got 2 levels of trades. This puts the work people that need to coordinate and manage and supervise next to the people who are doing the job, so it increases the efficiency. There was a comment about personnel access, a call out that was here. That's actually a bridge onto the boat. That's so the workers can actually climb into the vessel and access the interior of the vessel. The bridge above it that you saw in that graphic was where all the utilities come over, the power, the ventilation, the different types of services that are needed for those workers in the boat. So everything is strategically positioned on that mezzanine to deliver that material into the boat in the most efficient fashion. And then there's some other power equipment that's up on the upper equipment levels, as well as delivering materials in and out of the building at the lower level. So it's all been orchestrated to make that building work as efficiently as possible. And again, 26 inches of clearance above the cranes. It's a pretty tight workspace up there, especially when we have to get to maintain it. You know, a lot of operators would love to see a lot more space above their equipment to be able to access, but it just wasn't part of the plan at the time. So, with that, I'd like to open up for any questions for me.
Any questions, comments from commissioners at this point?
When I asked the question about the pilings,
Yes.
are you the person to ask that about?
About the
Driving
construction,
the piles?
the construction of them.
Yes.
Well, we have a construction contractor who'll be
Okay.
talking about the
I thought he
installation
turned
of
and
them.
looked at you when I asked that question. I'm sorry.
Well, you can ask the question, maybe you can determine. Why don't you ask your question and see if it's the right one or not?
No, he's-
Oh, I'm sorry.
Actually, my question is, and you mentioned there's going to be 500 pilings down there.
Yes.
Which I'm sure there's some associated noise there.
Drawings?
Noise.
Right. There's the basic noise, but the piles will be drilled piles. They won't be hammered piles. So you'll hear the sound of probably the crane running, but you won't hear a bing, bing, bing like you see on the side of the highway as
I
they're
recall
driving
when they
piles
when
on.
they constructed the grading, the present grading docks.
Right.
The nights that we spent awake all night while they were doing that.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any driving of piles. These are drilled piles, so they're augering through the rock very slowly at 100 some feet below the water surface in many cases. So there'll be plenty of buffer at that noise point.
And then my ignorance as far as a cofferdam around that to draw the water out.
Well, the casing does that. So what they do is they put a steel casing in, they're augering through the layer of sediment, they get down to the rock, and then they begin to auger into the rock, and they seat that casing in. And that casing holds the water out, and they're able to remove the material and the water, and then they go ahead and build that concrete structure within that casing. That casing is what we might call a sacrificial casing. It's there like you would talk about a cofferdam, but it stays there, and it becomes part of the permanent infrastructure at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So I'm sorry.
Yes.
But that casing is not driven into the rock, it's
No,
lowered in
no,
as-
it's
as-
drilled into,
drill-
it's drilled in,
as-
it's
as
basically,
the drill goes in, the casing is
right,
lowered
right.
into
And then we drill another 10, 15 feet into the rock. There's what they call a rock socket,
Yep.
which is what locks that thing, that casing in that pile into the rock so it can't pop out.
So we're not have a
Not
pile
pounding
driver,
on it.
we don't have a pile driver running.
No, we're not pounding on anything.
Okay. So that, do we have, is there an assessment of the noise level that the neighbors will be?
A construction noise, though, I don't think that's been assessed just yet.
Yeah,
No.
under the street level, you can probably be at a decimal.
Yeah, well,
We'll get to it.
Oh. Okay. We'll move on at this point. Is it there? Okay. We're a little. Oh, confused here. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll come back to that subject.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. For the record, my name is Stephanie White. I'm a licensed landscape architect with the state of Connecticut and with the consulting firm as well, Fuss & O'Neill. And I am the landscape architect for the project. And tonight I wanted to present to you the proposed landscaping for the project. For this zone, the requirements for the landscaping consist of a 25-foot width continuous buffer planting along the lot line for where a residential zone either abuts or is across the street from our zone, in which, Eastern Point Road across the street is all residential zone. Therefore, we need to provide a complete visual screening buffer planting along our lot line, shown here on this rendering. Laser pointers here? Okay. Here. In front of J lot, we have one row of evergreen plantings, because the buffer requirements require it to be a year-round screening interest. So there are evergreens proposed along here, and there is a lot of existing vegetation along this slope that goes down to the rock wall here that would be maintained and is included in part of that 25-foot buffer requirement. But where we have open lawn area, we have a full 25-foot buffer that consists of evergreen trees as well as some larger evergreen shrubs to kind of provide a multi-layered landscape approach for complete visual screening along here. This is the access drive to the transfer station, which, there'll be a little bit of an opening here for that roadway of the buffer. Also, the security fence that runs along Eastern Point Road here, EB has a requirement for security purposes that the plantings are at least 10 feet off that fence line. So as you can see, it's a little bit set back from the fence line for security purposes. The proposed evergreen plantings chosen are for a moderate fast growth and to help provide, there's a selected variety to help provide diversity, and they're going to be ranging from 6 feet then layered up to 40 feet approximately. Since we submitted the proposed landscaping plan, which, we had met with the neighbors of Eastern Point Road and Chapman Road, myself included, and some other members of Fuss & O'Neill and Electric Boat, to share with them what the proposed landscaping would look like along Eastern Point Road. And here is a 3D rendering of what that plan would look like. You can see the existing security fence along here with the dense evergreen buffers planting, and the rendering here is showing approximately what would it look like in a 10-year growth plan. And in those meetings, the neighbors had really expressed more of a different approach to the buffer planting. They were hoping to have a little bit more of this neighborhood feel and less of this industrial feel, if you will. So kind of working with them, we came up with a different scheme in which it has more of a streetscape approach to Eastern Point Road, in which there would be shade trees along the sidewalk with a band of perennials to provide seasonal interest, and strategically placing flowering trees and evergreen trees in such a manner to provide much more of visual interest and a less of an industrial look. Also, in working with them, we discussed the possibility of pushing back the 8-foot high security fence that abuts the sidewalk to really create a little bit more of an expansive, open feel along Eastern Point Road and a little bit more neighborly. This is a 3D rendering of that proposed approach of what Eastern Point Road would look like instead of the proposed. As you can see, the security fence is pushed back off the road, opening up more of a open feel with, your proposed perennial plantings and then shade trees to provide a little bit more of a nicer streetscape driving down Eastern Point Road. Before I take any questions, I'm just going to turn it back over to John, who will explain if the commission decides to entertain making any modifications to the buffer requirements.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I just wanted to step in here. So as I said, this application is for modifications to certain standards. We did not apply for a modification to the buffer standards. It's allowed under your regs, under section 4.4.e, but we didn't apply for it. It wasn't noticed as part of this public hearing, so I believe, and you can discuss this with your own attorney, but we can't ask for it now. It's too late. But if the commission preferred this model, what I think would have to happen is you could condition, if you approve the project and you wanted to go with this, you could condition the approval on us coming back to amend the special permit with this plan. But because that's a special permit requirement, I think it needs to go through that process. I don't know if Brian and I really haven't spoken about this at great length. This all came after the application was filed. But I just want to get across to the commission that we're willing to work with you, with the neighbors, on the buffer plan. So I just wanted to make that point, sort of how we would get there.
And again, Stephanie White for the record. And then an additional rendering here showing this is looking north from the existing entrance drive of what that would look like with the security fence, pulled back further down the hillside, creating a nice, more open expanse, open lawn area along here with the street trees. So with that, I'll open it up to questions regarding landscape.
Could you go back to the
Yep.
I just wanted to point out for the commissions, could you point out where the receiving station is, just to make sure that they're clear? Those boxes right there. So it doesn't show the power lines coming in there. So,
This has the new utility pole here. These are the two new utility poles for the
could you
receiving
point out
station.
where the boxes are for the,
Yep, and then this is the one building for the receiving station, the other one.
so in the more streetscape plan, you see a little bit more of those receiving station buildings, which the design is provided in the plans that were submitted. And they're rather modular-looking utilitarian type buildings. Might be nicer to see something a little bit more pleasant, especially if it's going to be opened up through the view standpoint. That's just my thoughts to share on that side of things. What's that? Yeah, I haven't digested yet, but no, there's a parking area you can pull into. Everything's set down a little bit lower. But isn't the base with the finished floor of each of those buildings roughly 10 feet lower than Eastern Point Road in this location? But the building somehow, the roof is like 4
Yes.
feet higher than the roof.
Yep.
So you are saying.
Okay. Yeah, this is the access into the receiving station. And also just wanted to point out too, the security fence in front of J Lot here, as part of that, change, we would be looking at removing the security fence along the parking lot here and it would just be only this security fence shown, and then it would jog kind of back down over to here. So this would be kind of the proposed limits of security fence.
But the lot stays, correct?
The lot stays, yeah. That's kind
And I
of-
know, I think the commission needs to know this, can you go back to the other view, please? On the left side of that screen, you can see a gray structure. So you see the larger building, right there, which is the assembly building. To the left of that is the floating dry dock. That floating dry dock, brought to my attention, is not within your jurisdiction. I bring it up because it's gonna come up in a letter from a member of the public. But that is something that's, correct me if I'm wrong, that is, under the jurisdiction of DEEP, because it's on their side of the coastal jurisdiction line. That coastal jurisdiction line is going to move when the new bulkhead is built.
I expect that EP will put testimony on that effect, like one of the engineers, the CJL line will move at some point here before the floating dry dock will be to the record.
So I'm sorry, so when that line moves, does that dry dock then become on our jurisdiction, or is that, or?
I'll let you just make sure.
No, I believe that there will be testimony. I anticipate that the coastal jurisdiction line will move to the west. I'm sorry, I strike that to the east. In connection with the construction here that's been approved and the permits that have been approved. Once that happens, the dry dock will be to the west of the coastal jurisdiction line, completely within the river, being a floating dock. And it would not come under your jurisdiction, but would come under the jurisdiction of other agencies. State of California.
Right, for the record, again, John Casey, that's exactly the case. So the dry dock itself will not arrive till about 2025, and it's completely within DEP's jurisdiction. The way it's designed, it's tethered, and a number of mooring dolphins and tether points embedded in the river that are under the jurisdiction of DEEP and the Army Corps. And so that'll be part of their permitting. As your counsel said, it'll actually be not only waterward of the CJL, the coastal jurisdiction line, which is the start of DEP's jurisdiction, but it's also be waterward of the mean high water line, which is the end of your jurisdiction. Those lines will be on the face of the bulkhead that's been approved by DEEP. And you'll hear from Steve O'Connor when he speaks, the bulkheads are really some of the first features that will be built, constructed at the site. So the shoreline of the river where that dry dock will be and where parts of the assembly building are, those will be modified first before they start doing any construction of the building itself, even the caissons.
Questions or comments from commissioners?
I have one.
Yes.
I really like the rendering with the trees and the bushes. If you could come through my backyard like this, I'd be thrilled. But my question is, it looks like from the drawings that the trees are on the outside of the fence.
This is they're in behind the fence.
Those are the evergreen, but
Yeah.
when you look at the tall trees.
Oh, in the Nord neighborhood approach?
Yes.
Yes, the fence would be gone. The fence would be gone along the front, and there would be street trees planted right in back of the sidewalk there.
And when I look at the picture here, there's an awful lot of electrical lines. The
These are
size,
this is the existing overhead utilities along
Yeah.
Eastern Point Road?
the size and the width of the trees
Right.
will require,
The offset would need to be in a way so that the crown of the tree is not going to be going into the overhead utility lines. And they have what they call utility-friendly street trees that we'd be looking at to propose along there that wouldn't impede with the growth of growing into the overhead utilities.
Other questions?
I guess I may as well ask. I'd like to revisit that structure you just talked about, that we will have no control over. Here's my follow-up with that.
Yes.
will there be cranes on that particular facility? Will it be a visible thing from Eastern Point Road? And that would be my concern. Why wouldn't we have any overture to take a look at it if indeed it's visible from our community?
I don't know about the cranes.
So right now,
Yeah. But I want to answer that question first, so
Okay.
we understand. Then I'll.
Oh, again, for the record, Paul Herron. Yes, there is at least one crane expected to be on the floating dry dock. That dry dock is currently under design. It's only at about a 30% design right now, so I don't know the details of what, that would look like. But, typically a floating dry dock has 1 to 2, and I believe, I'm not sure where we stand at the moment, whether it's 1 or 2, but yes, there would be a crane on it for, putting shore power on the boat, taking it off the boat, those types of things.
Now, to answer the question, the harder question, maybe it's not harder, but so under the Coastal Management Act and under a line of cases from the Connecticut State Supreme Court, they divided the jurisdiction at the shoreline between deep and towns. So there's a case out of Stamford called Rappaport, and the court said local municipal jurisdiction ends at mean high water. Everything beyond mean high water is in Connecticut DEP's jurisdiction. There's actually an overlap because deep's jurisdiction is an elevation coastal jurisdiction line, which is higher than mean high water. So if you're looking at a vertical wall bulkhead, mean high water is going to be lower, coastal jurisdiction line will be higher. If it's on a slant, part of that slanty shore will be in the state will be overlapped between the town and the state jurisdiction. When the state gives us a permit to take the shore here, which is kind of at a slant, and put it straight, and allows us to remove rock in their jurisdiction to build the little basin where that dry dock is going to go, they're allowing us to change those jurisdictional lines. And now the lines are along the face of the bulkhead, the new bulkhead that will be built. And while you can see it from local jurisdiction, DEP's responsibility as a permitting agency, they have the same requirements under the Coastal Management Act that you do in terms of compliance with policies. So their obligation is to determine that anything that they permit in their exclusive jurisdiction doesn't result in a adverse visual impact. So they have a policy to consider those visual impacts from different vantage points. And there's a series of decisions from the commissioner on a number of cases. Most of them have determined that that DEP, the policy doesn't protect private views. It doesn't protect. It balances the existing views with the proposed views. So in this case, the DEP in issuing its permit looked at all those issues. And so while I understand from a local control point of view, you want to say, we're going to see something from the upland that's in our municipality, we think we should have some control over it. That's, unfortunately, and you can talk to your attorney, that's not the way the law is set up. So anything waterward, exclusively in deep's jurisdiction, they get to decide if it has a visual impact.
So they made that decision without actually knowing what's going to be put there, essentially, correct? I mean,
Well, they know what the basic dimensions of the dry dock are going to be. They know its length, they know its width, they know its basic height above the water line. As Paul said, it hadn't been fully hadn't been fully designed, but it's been in the plans. That application was filed almost a year ago. It's been through their public comment process. And honestly, having done years of DEP process, DEP applications, we worked through it with DEP, and they were comfortable with their decision, obviously, based on their licensing determination. And then that's where we stand. So we know, as I said, this project is complicated, has a lot of overlapping jurisdictions, and for some features, definitely like the building, we're here. The building's in your jurisdiction because of the way it sits. We're here. We're not trying to avoid any particular permitting requirement, but it's only fair that where the lines of jurisdiction are clear, that we go and we get our permits that we need, and we don't subject ourselves to extra permitting.
Understood.
Thank you.
I get, any other questions on the landscape design? So I guess I have one, and that's, so EB is okay with moving the fence?
Yes.
Is that,
Yes.
based on the input from the residents?
Input from the
EB doesn't have
residents.
a problem with moving the fence to the
For-
other side of the trees?
Yeah, further back, so that kind of that open, have a little bit more of an open lawn feel along Eastern Point Road, and also eliminating, there's a double fence in front of the parking lot, J-lot, so that fence line in front of the parking lot would be removed, and it would just be the one in the back. So, yes, that would be something they are willing to move forward
But
with.
they're, yeah, so that passes muster at EB?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I think just, as I said before, just the challenge, whether it's a challenge, just a hurdle, is how do we do that?
Yeah, we gotta get the paperwork work.
Right.
Right.
So if there's no more questions for Stephanie, I think I'll turn it back over to John. And now we get to the noise study.
John Osowski again with Jacobs. So, not a noise yet. Do you know where the noise is?
Nobody wants to talk about this?
I will. All right, there we go. All right, there we go. All right, so we got two elements of noise because of your question. We've got the construction contracting firm here, construction management firm. He's going to talk about all the facets of construction. So I'll let him, that's his bailiwick. I'll let him go over that. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the design engineering team did to support EB, gathering some data. So to address the commission's request to do a noise evaluation, the first thing we did was we developed an existing condition sound profile. And if you look closely on the left, that's a picture of the public notice sign sitting at the end of Chapman Street, and then a zoom in of a noise monitoring piece of equipment. It's not a recorder, it just measures decibels of sound. And it was mounted in there over the course of a week inside the EB fence line. That's the front sidewalk right near the edge of the roadway. And it was left on 24 hours a day and continuously monitored all the noise, ambient noise in that area, including what was happening within the south yard and some of the initial works that's going on in there, the enabling projects that have already been permitted, beginning to clean up that area and preparing for the next phase. We then looked at developing a post-development sound profile. As I said before, the design team is still moving forward with design of the facility, but all of the major equipment and specifications and design bases for equipment pretty much all been selected. And so we gather all that information up, we go to the vendors, and we get sound data from the equipment, either the RPMs of the equipment or sound coming off mufflers or fans or any type of sound generation that's occurring with any of that equipment. We factor that into a computer program, and it generates a profile of the sound that's generated from the building during its normal operation. So let me kind of summarize what that looks like. So it's a little blurry to see on the left-hand side, but there's a table in the packet. What I tried to do here was just kind of highlight this, because the concept of decibels are a little difficult to understand at times. But if you look closely, you can see a carrier jet in operation is 140 decibels. Freeway traffic is somewhere between 70 and 80 decibels if you're 50 feet away. And light auto traffic is about 50 decibels. So on the right-hand side, the initial data that I collected and that we put through and evaluated showed the existing sound levels ranging from 40 decibels to 70 decibels. The 40 decibel reading, the 40 to 50 decibel reading occurred between the hours of 1 and 4 a.m. So obviously a time when you expect not a lot of traffic on the roadways. The future sound levels that were generated from our evaluation of the operations of the building were 50 to 54 decibels at the property line up at Chapman Street, basically the same location that you saw that monitor sitting. So based on the requirements of the code, we've concluded that the future facility sound levels are consistent with the existing conditions out there on Eastern Point Road.
Questions or comments, commissioners? So I'm going just,
No, go ahead.
so I'm no sound engineer, but if we're already at 40 to 70 and the future is going to be 50 to 54, do those add?
No, they do not. So in the sound model doesn't capture the existing noise. It just tells you if there was zero noise anywhere along Chapman Street, what would be coming across the property line. And that noise level would be 50 to 54. So there's actually more noise on Chapman Street under the existing condition, which will essentially wash out any noise from the facility if you're standing across the street from the EB fence line.
Okay, yeah, so that was my,
Yeah,
so my
sorry.
question was, we're not going to be looking at.
The building's not reducing the sound
90
level.
to 120.
No.
Your question is related to the cumulative effect of
Right,
increased
Right.
what's the-
noise.
what, does, yeah, right,
If you
does
have
that,
50 decibels plus another 50 decibels, does that make
Exactly.
100 decibels?
yeah,
No.
that was.
Yeah, it is not that way. Yes.
Do you have some?
I think that was basically my question, because when I see something that says facility only,
Right.
and the other comparative doesn't, it makes me question what would the difference be? And I guess the difference is the top one is measuring all the sound around.
Top one is measuring all the sounds without the new building there. That's what's there today. So vehicle traffic up and down Eastern Point Road, the ferry horns going off, the sound in the background from the 95 bridge, sirens going across, fire trucks in New London, squawks of seagulls. We actually saw spikes at some times. You could hear the squawk of the seagull. We presumed it was something of that nature. So all that got captured in that model over the course of those days. And all this is showing is that if all that was gone, generation from the building would be less than that is right now.
When you say from the building, are you saying the building and internal of the building? What about machinery or equipment driving around outside of the building?
Well, there's not a whole lot of machinery that drives around all day long outside the building. There's a few movements of modules, but those are electric machines, and so they don't generate a lot of noise. The way the model functions is you take all the equipment, except for a few pumps that are out on the back south corner, which are small pieces of equipment. They are captured as exterior noise elements, but they're literally buffered by the building if you're talking about what's occurring on Eastern Point Road. So all the equipment within the building is all taken at its actual sound level. That sound, albeit the equipment may be louder than the 75 decibel number that we use, and I'll tell you how we get there. At the unit, when you're standing right at a unit, it could be louder. We are going to use some of this data to help EB develop the health and safety program as well, just for worker exposure and try to minimize noise exposure to the day-to-day workforce. But that sound all migrates to the outer skins of the building. And then we took into account the insulating factor of the building, except for where there are doors, obviously. And it drops that sound level down to about a decibel level of 75. And then that noise migrates outside the building and then takes off towards, in all different directions. And one unique thing about the model is, if you've ever been out on a windy day and the wind is blowing at you, you hear a lot more noise than if the wind is blowing away from you, because it literally sound is pushed, because it is a sound, it's a wave, it's a pressure wave. This model ignores any direction. It's as though it's completely quiescent, and sound travels in all directions at the exact same time, which isn't realistic, but it gives us the worst case scenario of looking at the perimeter of the building and that sound migration in all directions, and allows us to see that decibel reading as it departs the facility, and then begins to react with some of the other surroundings.
I guess breaking this up, and I'm not being facetious when I say this.
It's okay.
Having grown up in this area and heard those cranes, I'm glad you mentioned the wind, and I'm glad we realized there's going to be a crane on that Raven Dock. What's the decibel reading of that going to be?
I don't know. It's not even designed yet. No. But the
So everything
frequency
inside the
used, I would
building is going to
imagine,
be
is fairly
quiet,
small.
however, that crane will create some noise.
Yeah, but I would presume the frequency of use would be relatively small.
Right, so again, Paul Herron. One thing to point out is that the crane on the floating dry dock, that dry dock itself is only intended to be used for about 2 weeks a year. So, there won't be much usage of either the dock or the crane on the dock.
2 weeks a year.
That's the intent, yes. It's intended to only be used for launch of submarines. So when we're in steady state, our our launch rate is 1 per year. And so, it will only be used once a year for launches of boats.
What are the normal hours of operation for you?
We operate 3 shifts. Obviously, first shift is the biggest. We're kind of changing our ratios to eventually target 50% of our workforce on first shift, or 50% of our trades on first shift, 40% on second, and 10% on third.
So 24 hours?
Yes. But third shift is very lightly loaded.
Just, I guess, a question for staff. Is this something that BL could look at in terms of the noise impact piece? Is that a calculation they would check or confirm?
We'll ask them if they can.
Just to make sure that everybody's in agreement about where we're going to end up. All right, anything else on this? Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, my name is Kristen Soloway. I'm going to discuss parking and traffic. So for parking, the city has a regulation of 1 space for every 3 employees. Electric Boat currently meets this parking regulation and will continue to meet the parking regulation for when this building is completed. Sorry. Place. This gives an annual employee count for the first shift. As per the regulations, the regulations require that it's for your maximum shift of employees. So beginning in existing, there's 6,600, approximately 6,600 employees. There's 3,800 parking spaces. So per the zoning regulation, we're required to have 2,200 parking spaces, but we're above that right now. Electric Boat has projected their employee counts out to 2029. Just note that this is a projection. That may change come those later years, but we will continue to meet the required parking. It is, reduced from the 2,200, it'll be up to 2,740 is what's required, with the 3,800 parking spaces. Electric boat will be, will continue to meet. It is required per your regulations that parking spaces and are, an employee counts are given every year, and they will continue to do that. So with this project, there is no parking proposed as we meet the current regulation. For traffic, we did prepare a traffic impact statement. We analyzed the existing intersection network in the study area, and we did receive comments from city staff as well as BL companies. We have addressed the comments. There was several intersections that they requested be analyzed. We did analyze additional intersections. The study is being reviewed. The revised study will be submitted either today, tomorrow or Thursday. But the additional analysis that we did prepare did conclude that there won't be a level of service change. So as far as traffic goes, we analyze for how a certain intersection operates. And the main intersections between Electric Boat and I-95 were analyzed, as well as out to Clarence B. Sharp. We did, Rainville and Eastern Point Road, Benham, Clarence B. Sharp, and then going out through Chicago Avenue, Mitchell Street, the five-way intersection. We went in both directions. The existing level of service did not change between, our study went out 5 years, and it was asked that we continue to bring that out to the 10-year interval. The level of service did not change from existing today. However, we will need to optimize the traffic signal timings that are part, that's how the intersections run. They're, how the red, make it easy, how the red, yellow, and green get timed. So those would have to get changed to make them so they're optimal, so, not one leg isn't, waiting for another leg for more than, an optimal time. So the intersections will continue to operate as they do today. There's no necessary, no need for improvements for widening additional lanes, or, the queues, the length of backup, let's say, will remain consistent with what is out there today. And I was also asked to put into the record to discuss, your zoning regulations require for 7.8C compliance with performance standards for dangerous or objectionable elements. I'm not going to read through the whole list just for a matter of time, but they discuss, about discharges of smoke, fly ash, and how that's not going to occur. Will there be, no glare? We have discussed those. There is a whole list. It is included in our narrative in the application, and if there is something specific, I'd be happy to answer it.
Questions or comments from commissioners?
I didn't hear anything about Smith Street or Thames Street, nor did I hear anything, and I'm sure the traffic authority, the chief here, will address with the number of parking spaces you have, I can see our community reverting back to the private parking lots to handle the overflow. And I know from my experience, having been involved in law enforcement and this community, that we have traffic situations where all the streets off of Smith Street turn left onto Mitchell Street, which causes traffic congestion as far as traffic safety problems also. I asked Mr. Grenier for the report. I haven't reviewed the entire report, but you are going to submit a new one.
Correct.
But I did note that those two specific streets, which are utilized quite a bit by vehicles coming from Electric Boat, those two streets are utilized frequently, but those, from what I can hear, were not included in the survey.
There was, I think there's 7 or 8 intersections that were analyzed. I just went through the major ones. I can go through all of them, but we have addressed, there isn't any, I do note that, those intersections where there's no left turn at specific hours, we're not proposing to change any of that. That's currently needs to stay enforced. I can go through the whole list. No,
all right.
you don't want me to.
I just wanted, and I know the streets you're talking about, and my observation, recently it hasn't been enforced, all right? But sooner or later, with the increase in population of the workforce.
Yes.
I
I
can
do note that,
envision a problem.
we do note that there's the existing, we refer to them as the third-party parking lots, that we can't count them in a parking count because they're not owned by Electric Boat, but, they're not part of the account. But they're accounted for in the traffic analysis in that the existing counts, we did perform existing counts during the peak hour of Electric Boats, it's 6:30 to 8:30. I think we counted from 6:30 to 9, in the morning and then in the evening again. And those are all, counted for as part of the background traffic analysis.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments from commissioners? So one thing I did notice on the traffic studies, that I didn't see Mitchell Street mentioned anywhere, which is kind of surprising. On the list of streets that were reviewed, I didn't see that.
That has been included in the revised study.
Okay, so that was included, that was added to the revised, that struck me. And I guess the parking thing is, there's an actual need, and then there's what the regulations require, right? Because I think staff did a look and found out that, while the regs require, one parking space for every 3 employees, the actual utilization of the parking spaces is more like 1.8 spaces per employee, right? Was that what you came up with, Dennis, when you took a head count? So yeah, but you're meeting the regulations, but there's still a problem, right?
Yeah, for the record, John Casey again. From the perspective of a land use lawyer, all we can do and all we can provide this commission is proof that we meet your regulations, and anything that EB would do above and beyond what's required, and I'm not saying that they're not, and Maura can speak to that, but we'd just be concerned about any kind of arbitrary. There's a number, we meet it. I don't think you can, provide us with a sort of I'll say arbitrary, it's the nicest way to say it, number, and say, no, now you got to do this, when that's not really what's required. But that aside, I think there is an effort in place, and Maura Dunn will speak to that.
So again, I'm Maura Dunn. I have been leading an effort on the part of Electric Boat. We've certainly been listening to the feedback provided by neighbors and elected officials in the area, and clearly there's a view that while we are compliant with the regulations, we should in fact do some more. So we've worked with our traffic consultants and landscape architects and the variety of expertise that Fuss & O'Neill brings to the table, and we are in negotiations to add a number of parking spaces in the near term that will actually bring us to 80%, which is consistent with what other employers do and well in advance of your regulations. But we have further suggested to the city it might be a good idea to do. If you look at our near-term population projections, they actually go down. It fluctuates based on how the maintenance and overhaul work comes into the yard. At this point, we're in discussions with the Navy with additional contracts, and we're hopeful that some of those will land here in Groton for repair. But if you look, the big buildup does not really happen in our staffing levels until 2024, when the new building, assuming it's approved by you all, is actually brought online. So at that point, we would begin to need additional parking as the staffing grows. And it would be our intentions to sit down with the city and bring to the table, here's where we think the projections are, here's what we're prepared to do on an annual basis with regard to parking. So we believe we have both a short and long-term answer to address the parking issues and actually put us well in excess of the current regulations under the city of Groton. Are there any questions about mine?
Thank you for that. And I guess my other question about parking is that, there's 3,800 existing spaces, but some of those spaces, I believe, are used by employees who work in London. Isn't that correct? Am I mistaken about that? I mean, we're
I think there are.
Are these employees, the employee numbers, or this is just the Groton site, correct?
We'll let Kristen. Sorry, I've been also losing my voice.
Again, Kristen Soloway. So we have accounted for, there are a number of employees that do go from Groton to New London. They are parking in MLOT. That has been the direction that they try to get everybody to park in MLOT that does go to New London. There is a shuttle that goes from Groton to New London. And we've accounted for that if our parking summary table doesn't count up to, there's a large number of parking spaces in MLOT. There's, over 500. And so we've reduced that number of what's available for the Groton facility to account for that number that travel to New London every day.
So the list of the existing EV parking spaces, that's adjusted to
Correct.
down to
Right.
to remove the number of spots that are utilized by folks who work in New London.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Is there any other questions?
Steve O'Connor, Senior Project Manager with AECom Construction. Just want to talk a little bit about the scheduling and the planning for the work that's going to take place. Our game plan is to get the bulkhead work completed first, which is on the north side and the south side. This operation here is showing the start of the work. We got the north bulkhead is shown right here. The south bulkhead is shown over here. Game plan is to get these bulkheads worked so we can make use of that area to feed the construction site as we're doing the drilled shafts in the water over here, drilled shafts on land over in here. Game plan is to work the project from the north to the south going in this direction here. We have more than 500 some odd drilled shafts out here. I just want to stop right there. We're using different terminology here. There's piles, there's drilled shafts, there's caissons. Those terms are all being used synonymously on this project. What we have here are actually drilled shafts. I also heard the term cofferdam called up here. This job doesn't have any cofferdams at all. You could consider the bulkheads little cofferdams because there is some sheeting in there. But all of our piles, caissons are really drilled shafts, and they're all going to be drilled into place. At the bulkhead walls, which are here and here, there is going to be sheet piling in there that's going to be inserted in little slots. That's in between these 3-foot, 42-inch diameter drilled shafts that are going to be going into the the rock and placed over there. We're showing barges here to install the land-based drilled shafts here. The game plan with planning on is to have 4 crews during the day, 4 crews at night, 2 working on land, 2 working on the water, for approximately 7 months to install all these drilled shafts. So you will have noise with that, but the noise is going to be crane operation, loader operations, getting materials on and off barges. You're going to have tugboats running, pushing the barges around. The drilled shaft operation is actually a gripper that will grab the pipe caisson that we put down into the ground, and it will shimmy the pipe back and forth, and it will drill itself in. The pipe casing actually has little teeth to drill it into the rock as we get down to that level. After we get beyond the drilled caisson work, the game plan is to start installation of precast. There's approximately 1,500 pieces of precast that has to be set in place on the project. Same thing, we're going to work from the north end to the south end installing the precast. That material will all be brought on site by way of barge. There'll be cranes that'll be used to offload it. We get this north end built first. We'll set up our crane and access paths on this way, and then we'll have 2 access paths that we'll build ourselves out on this deck. As we receive precast, we're going to build this section. Get more precast, build the next section, and so on and so forth. After the precast is in place, we plan on starting an operation approximately 3 months of installing all of the concrete that goes in here. There's approximately 20,000 cubic yards on that deck in that location of concrete that goes in. Deck gets placed and we'll start a structural steel operation. Again, we're going to try and bring as much steel as possible on site by way of barge, offload it on this end over here, get this section built first, and work our way to the south with the structural steel operation. That will be followed behind with the skin, the roof, get the building tight. As we get to the end down at this vicinity of the South Yard building, there are some large cranes that we have to get installed. Cranes, again, will be delivered by way of barge. We'll have large cranes down here that drop the crane structure into the building over here to get it up on the rails. That has to be done before we close up the steel and top off the steel on the building. Time frames, just in general, we have about 7 months doing the drilled caissons, another 6 months doing precast, 3 months doing the concrete operation in here, and then about a year doing the structural steel, the miscellaneous metal that goes in, the siding, the roofing, all that material. We talked about barge deliveries. There will be many trucks that will be associated with the project. There'll be rebar deliveries coming in through the construction access road, concrete deliveries coming in down through this road. The roofing material will come in down that road. Metal paneling will come down through that road. So we're trying to get the biggest materials we can to come in through by way of barge on this project. We're looking at building completion, being basically constructed, everything done except for testing, startup, getting systems active, July 23rd, and then systems active would go into November, December, February of the following year. Do I have my dates right? No. I'm a year late, okay, that's what I thought. 2022. So our building completion is February 2023. I was working backwards. Construction issues parking. We're looking at 300 to 400 people coming on the job site parking. And Electric Boat is working on trying to figure out where we're going to be, whether it's going to be an off-site parking, where that's going to be set up, bus transportation in. Stockpile and storage of materials. Again, we're going to bring material in as needed. We don't have a lot of space on this job site. We already talked about material deliveries via the construction road. Construction hours, normal working hours are from 7 o'clock in the morning from 3:30 in the morning. The gates will open up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They'll close at 5 o'clock in the evening. We will have the 2 shifts running while we're doing the drilled caisson work. So that work will go from 6 o'clock in the morning till 2 o'clock the following morning. They'll be working 10-hour shifts, and Saturdays doing the drill shaft work. So it'll be 6 days a week, 2 shifts, 10 hours a day. Issues on this job site, dust control. We'll have water trucks out there, set up spray farms if necessary to control the dust. Lighting, for our purposes, we'll probably use some of the existing, well, we're definitely going to use some of the existing light poles that are on the job site if they're not in our way. I think there's one over here, another one over here. The construction fence will be lighted up with low-level lights that'll sit on the fence. In addition to some of the work out on the water, we'll have some light power units that will be sitting on the barges. They'll be sitting on land to provide light so that the guys can do their work. Blasting will comply with the regulations, the laws that was already discussed earlier on. That's all I really have for a presentation here. Anybody have any questions?
Questions or comments from Commissioner?
I have, can you just clarify, you said that the hours of operation would be 7 to 5 or 6 to 2 a.m.?
So normal construction hours are from 7 o'clock to 3:30. The guys usually show up about a half hour before that. They get ready for the day. They put their tools on. They go to work for 8 hours. We're going to open up the gates at 6 o'clock in the morning. We're going to close them at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The primary operations that'll be working time will be these early operations, the drilled shafts, the concrete, the steel. These are the key elements. We have the smallest crews involved that we're going to spend some premium to get this work done so we can have the later on trades follow behind and they won't be working as much off-shift hours.
I may have misunderstood, but I thought I heard you say the gates would open at 3:30.
No, if I said that, that was an error. They'll open at 6 o'clock in the morning. They will close at 5 o'clock at night.
All right.
Because you get late people, stragglers working overtime.
Yep.
But you would still,
3:30 in the afternoon, yeah, okay.
excuse me, you would still have people working there though, and if you're running 2 shifts, didn't you mention 2 shifts?
We do have 2 shifts
They
going
just
on for
wouldn't
the
be
early
coming in the
operation.
gate, correct? They wouldn't be coming in through the
They would be
back.
coming in the gate. We'd have to, man it when they come in, man it when they leave. We're going to close the gates at 5. They're going to be basically locked in, and then at the end of the night, the gates will open up, they'll leave for the day.
You mentioned a considerable amount of concrete going to be brought in.
Yep.
And how long of a period of time is that? You mentioned like 3 months for this or 7 months for that. Is there an anticipated period of time for that?
The bulk concrete, which is pouring the deck floor, is about a 3-month activity. There's other activities that involve concrete. All the drilled shafts have concrete in them. There's actually a good amount of concrete in those shafts. That'll be ongoing
Because
as
you mentioned
well.
that they're going to be coming in that,
They'll be coming in that construction entrance. They'll be
and I'm
running
sure
it.
you've already thought about it, is the fact that they're going to be reconstructing the bridge in New London. Is the contract or the concrete coming from the London side or from the Groton side?
It would be coming from, right now it's coming from Norwich, most likely.
So
Tilcon
we'll-
has a plant there as a fallback. They would go to Old Saybrook and bring concrete from there.
And I can see a delay with that, and that stretches out your hours because you've got or concrete that you've got to pour.
Yep.
If it gets stuck on traffic on the bridge.
If it gets stuck on traffic,
Yep.
I actually had the discussion with the Tilcon guys today. They said they could be flexible. They'll probably concentrate on getting the material from Norwich. If there's any issues coming from Norwich, they'll switch to the Old Saybrook site.
So, Paul Herron again. Every time I come to the microphone, right? So, just for a point of comparison, when we rebuilt Grave Knox 1 and 2 back in the 2006-07 timeframe, we placed a comparable amount of concrete to what's going to be placed on this job site. So, as far as gauging how much, concrete truck traffic there is, it would be comparable to, what we did at that time. So anybody.
Which was comparable, 10 trucks a day, 30 trucks a day.
Steve, you could probably speak to how many trucks a day,
Well,
but
when we're doing these bulk concrete pours, we're talking about 300 yards a day, so that's 30 trucks when we're doing these bulk concrete pours for that 3-month period. Divide that out, that's about.
Well, I would just hope that we don't have the traffic tie down that we did when they repaired this bridge.
oh, yes, I understood. I was speaking more to the traffic in the neighborhood.
I'm thinking about, well, it could affect that, because if you have trucks if it gets to that degree where you're not getting it in on first shift, you may have to get it in on second shift to complete the project.
If we have to do that, we will do that. I'll talk to the plant operators about setting up a second shift delivery.
Thank you.
Okay, so I had so laydown areas, you're on a really tight site there.
Yeah.
And a lot, almost all the space down there right now is currently in use, correct? There's not a lot of empty space for you to
There is
material laydown.
not a lot of empty space on this site. We haven't locked any place down yet, but we're looking at some